So, dual extrusion. You're thinking of upgrading your printer to one, or just buying a printer or anything. I don't care. Let's not waste your time and start. Let's start by saying the difference between multi-material and multicolor. Sorry, yeah, I said it right. Multicolor is just for aesthetics, like say this little guy. It's just pretty, you know. And multi-material is things like support different properties, flexible and rigid materials combined, having the best of both worlds, basically. Those can have varying uses that I will not go into because this video, actually, the previous recording was 32 minutes, so. Dual extrusion methods can be categorized into two categories. One is single nozzle and two is multiple nozzle. Single nozzle has the advantage of requiring just one hot end and not needing any offsets. The dual extrusion lets you use multiple materials without any issues or clogging or anything like that, and usually they have better methods. The disadvantage is the nozzle calibration, which can be compensated for by a camera, which can be a microscope or endoscope or something camera that they use for going inside your throat, but you can just buy one for cheap for other uses. You can use every camera to calibrate it with some OpenCV. I would also like to mention something about the myth of hips. ABS and hips don't work together as dissolvable support. The lignin you need for ABS is not only dangerous but weakens the ABS massively and damages it. That's not a possibility. You can only use PVA, but for ABS, if you don't need to dissolve it, if you just want to be able to perfectly remove it without any contact distance, you can just use a PLA as support or PETG. There's just a lot of options there for you. Talk about a single hot end. First is Cyclops. It uses two separate heat breaks and one nozzle. It's the disadvantage is that it's the special nozzle you need from E3D. You always need two filaments present in your hot end. If you ever retract wrong, it needs precise retractions. You will backflow into the other channel, and the clogs you will get are a mess from what I've heard. I never had one, but I've heard they are a pain to work with. The advantage is that they barely need any purging. The purging is very small. You can mix materials, TPU and PLA, you can have something in between. This is a really cool property that I actually want the Cyclops for my do changer if I ever have the money one day and I'm rich. This is a very cool property, but sadly it just ends there. You need less purge, mixing, but terrible clogs, a pain to set up. You always need two filaments there, and the other one will carbonize due to high temperature if you idle it for too long, and it's not like you can retract it because it will just backflow. The second method of single nozzle dual extrusion that I want to talk about is the Y-splitter style, which falls into the category of MMU, 3D Chameleon. They are they have a high tendency to clog, but I've heard the new updates to the MMU improved it. They waste a ton of filament. You can get rid of you can manage it by using wipe on infill or just using a sacrificial mechanical part you don't care about the looks of, to just use that as a wipe or purge tower. Or if you need a lot of something, you can just use like 10 or 20 of the same object, as much as you can fit on your build plate. It will still use the same amount of purge because it only purges when it does a tool change. They can be prone to clogging too. If you use PETG and PLA, it's very likely that the PETG will cause you some issue weakening of your PLA part. Your PLA parts might come in weak because PETG and PLA are like oil and water. That's why they are used as supports with each other. So if you do that, you will not have much luck with multi-material. It's just mostly for pretty prints, and that's also valid if that's what you want. Also wanted to mention that usually the 3D Chameleon and MMU, the main methods that I've seen, do cost a lot. So the startup cost is high, and the advantage is that there's a lot of printers that can just already be made like that with just a plug-in, like the the Palette 3D does that. It splices the filament together. You can do that with Palette 3D without any special skills or modding. That's the main point of that. And if you have, say, 5 or 6 filaments on the dual extrusion, you will have to pay for 5 hot ends. That gets a lot, maybe more than the $300 for the MMU or something. I forgot how much that is. But otherwise, it's really not my favorite method, but it's a very personal thing. For you, it might be your favorite method. To what I consider the good stuff. First, I want to talk about my favorite method of two dual or multiple hot end dual extrusion. That is tilting hot ends. The principle is simple. You have two hot ends, you tilt them. What does that do for you? it blocks the other nozzle. It avoids oozing and it moves it out of the way so it doesn't hit the print. What's the advantage of it? It's very fast. The tool change takes a split second. Boop, you're done. That's the tool change. So the disadvantage is that it usually can't do more than 2 or 3 tools, and with the 3 tools, unless you do 2 steppers with 4 hot ends, you will not get dual extrusion with a single motor unless you get creative. I haven't figured something out for that, and I don't want it because it's not something I want. And you will not be able to like change to a spindle, but that's outside the category of this video. You will probably be thinking of a tool changer for CNC spindles and lasers if you want to go into that, like additive, I forgot the term for it, like printing stuff and then removing carefully some of the areas, like making the holes with a CNC and all that. If you're a creative, make it a direct job using a single stepper. That saves costs, and the overall cost can be very low if you get creative. It's just a thrust bearing, or it's just a like 2 thrust bearings and a servo, or sometimes you can skip the servo and use magnets and hit the thing to the frame, or not even use a magnet. Like the Ultimaker does the lifting one. You can easily translate the mechanism to a rotating one if you want to. I don't get why Ultimaker does lifting, because lifting doesn't have the advantage of tilting because it doesn't get blocked. But you can just as easily do it the way Ultimaker does and spend like mostly just design time. It's almost free to design something like that. So another disadvantage is that designing can be very complicated depending on if you buy it or not, or what you want to achieve. It can be complicated, but it also can be very simple. I guess that's with everything. Let's talk lifting hot ends very quick. It's just worse tilting hot ends. That's it, literally. Just worse tilting hot ends. You don't get the blockage, and that's the only difference. Now let's talk about the tool changer, most notably known by the E3D tool changer, which costs a lot, but it can be done cheaply if you get creative or want to. Let's make some sacrifices. The most notable printers are the E3D tool changer and the Jubilee that I have seen. Both are in the 3000 range, but in the cheaper 800 range, I've seen my own printer. I'd let time to brag right now. But mine, basically, depending on your configuration, can cost $700 to $800. It really depends on how you do it. You could even do it cheaper, because I'm talking about the BMG extruder with $800. Advantages: the limit of the tools you have are your pins and your frame size. Tools are very isolated and independent. You will not interfere with any other tool. When you have one and it behaves like a single extruder, you can forget that it's a dual extruder or a special printer when you're printing just one material, which is a lot of times for me. And you can have spindles, lasers, you can have anything as big as you want. But let's get into the disadvantages. The biggest one for me, time consumed. Each tool change can take, let's say, a minimum of 6 seconds. That doesn't sound like much, but multiply that over like a 5-hour, 8-hour print that takes 1,000 layers and has like 500 tool changers. It's just calculate. Yeah, it's gonna add like an extra 2 hours or something to a lot. So some prints, it depends on the print. Usually it's like 30 minutes to 3 hours for me. I've not seen more than that. 3 hours for intense prints with a lot of tool changes. The other disadvantage is that you can't do dual direct extrusion with just one motor, but you can do multiple, almost infinite bowdens with just one servo and motor. If you use the selector type that has many idlers on its side, you just rotate the selector with a servo. Use one extruder if you want to save costs. You can do that with the tool changer. And depending on your configuration or what you're doing, the price can vary a lot. There's the magnetic kind that can't handle heavy tools usually unless you add some fancy magnets. And it can be kind of loud. There's a servo that goes like I hope that wasn't too weird, but that's really the kind of sound the tool changer makes. And my tool changer is more like 2 metal things whacking together. Like, have you ever thrown magnets in the air and just have them snap? That's the sound mine makes. Maybe I can improve it with some TPU to just temporarily dampen the beginning isolation, or just, go slower. I'm not sure. Tool changer is more versatile but takes longer. That's really the main takeaway. And you can do this the single extruder dual extrusion thing, but that's really up to you, and your budget depends on that really. But yeah, that could be a considerable factor for that. Maybe there's a way, but the noise is annoying for me. But if you put it away outside your room, which I think you should, if you want to print anything overnight and be able to sleep, that goes away. Let's talk about IDX. IDX is just two simple separate X carriages. The way you do that usually with two motors, but I have not seen this, but in theory you should be able to make this too by just attaching the carriage, like the carriage attaching itself to the belt by just, you know, a solenoid or something, just grabbing the belt. Or some magnets, you know, we can always get creative. That's something I have in theory. I'm not sure if anyone else thought of that or done it. I just thought I'd mention it. The advantage is really similar to the tool changer, but the disadvantage is the cost, weight added, because, you know, extra motor is a lot of weight, and unless you do a core XYU, you really can't do it. And core XYU just adds a lot of belts and idlers. It's not ideal. Overall, I don't like this method much, and I don't see the advantage a lot compared to the tool changer and everything else. I guess it doesn't require the kinematic coupling and the design there, but still, if you get creative, you can do that cheaply with like a really cheap 2B YJ something motors and all that, and just, you know, some acorn nuts and dowel pins. You can do that, probably put together. But yeah, hope this helps you decide on the dual extrusion. What do you think? This was really, I'm sorry if it looked really angry and fast to you. This is because the old video that was more like casual took like, there was like 35 minutes of video, and no one wants to watch 35 minutes of video, so I just rushed it over a little, only talked about the popular ones. These are really the popular ones, main ones. I did not cover the Chimera because it kind of sucks, and I don't get why anyone want to do Chimera. It's really bad, and the nozzle heads and oozing and ugh. So I hope this was helpful. Bye. Also show me your cool dual extrusion prints.